African lady was bought in black market by Chinese billionaire CO. What took place next? She thought the nightmare ended when the chains came off, but her new master didn't buy her for what she feared. He bought her for something far more dangerous. From the darkest trade emerged the brightest defiance. She wasn't born to be owned, and he wasn't ready for the woman who would teach him that. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comments section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The rain hammered against the corrugated iron roof of the warehouse in Lagos, Nigeria, creating a symphony of despair that matched the breaking of Amara Okonkwo's spirit. At 23 years old, she had never imagined her life would lead to this moment. Bound, gagged, and thrown into the back of a cargo truck with 17 other women, all heading toward an uncertain fate that promised nothing but suffering. Amara's story, like so many others, began with hope. She had been a university student studying computer science at the University of Lagos, dreaming of creating technology that would bridge the digital divide in Africa. Her father, a retired schoolteacher, had sold his small plot of land to pay for her education. Her mother worked 14-hour days as a seamstress to supplement the family income. Amara was their golden child, their ticket to a better future, the one who would lift them out of poverty and into prosperity. But hope is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the cruel realities of a world that preys on the vulnerable. It started with a phone call that changed everything. Her younger brother, Chidi, had been in an accident. The hospital bills were astronomical, far beyond what her parents could afford. Without immediate surgery, he would die. The doctors were clear: no money, no treatment. In Nigeria, as in many parts of the world, your ability to live was often determined by the thickness of your wallet. Desperate and drowning in despair, Amara had made the fateful decision that would alter the trajectory of her entire existence. She responded to an online advertisement that promised legitimate work overseas. The company, which called itself Global Opportunities International, claimed to place African professionals in high-paying jobs across Asia. The testimonials seemed genuine. The website looked professional. The contracts appeared legitimate. How could she have known it was all an elaborate lie? The recruitment officer, who met her in a coffee shop in Victoria Island, was a woman named Patricia. She was well-dressed, articulate, and convincing. She spoke of opportunities in China, of companies desperate for English-speaking professionals, of salaries that would make Amara's financial problems disappear overnight. All Amara needed to do was sign the contract and pay a small processing fee of 200,000 naira, money she borrowed from a loan shark at an exorbitant interest rate. Within 2 weeks, Amara found herself on a plane to Guangzhou, China, her heart filled with nervous excitement and the weight of her family's expectations. She had promised her father she would save Chidi. She had promised her mother she would make them proud. She had promised herself that this sacrifice would be worth it. But the moment she landed in China, everything changed. The company representative who met her at the airport was not the professional woman she had spoken to online. Instead, he was a thin, chain-smoking man with cold eyes and a grip like iron. He took her passport, claiming it was standard procedure for processing work permits. He drove her not to an office building or a training facility, but to a dingy apartment building on the outskirts of the city, where she was locked in a room with 5 other African women, all of whom had similar stories of betrayal and false promises. For 3 days, they were held there, given minimal food and water, their questions met with threats and violence. On the 4th day, they were drugged, loaded into vehicles, and transported to the warehouse where Amara now found herself, bound and terrified, her dreams of saving her brother replaced by the nightmare of her own survival. The warehouse was a processing center for human trafficking, a place where people ceased to be individuals and became commodities. The traffickers were businesslike in their cruelty, evaluating their captives with the cold efficiency of merchants appraising livestock. They checked teeth, examined bodies, assessed physical attributes, all while discussing their inventory in a mixture of Mandarin, English, and Pidgin that created a horrifying lingua franca of exploitation. Amara's mind, even in its state of shock and terror, worked frantically to process what was happening. She had read about human trafficking in academic papers, seen documentaries about modern slavery, even written an essay on the subject for a sociology class. But nothing, no amount of intellectual understanding, could have prepared her for the visceral horror of experiencing it firsthand. The stench of fear and unwashed bodies, the sounds of crying and praying in multiple languages, the feeling of utter helplessness as control over one's own body and destiny was violently stripped away. These were lessons no classroom could teach. Among the captives, Amara formed a quick bond with a woman named Fatima from Cameroon. Fatima was older, perhaps in her early 30s, and had a 7-year-old daughter back home. She had been promised work as a nanny for a wealthy family in Beijing. Instead, like Amara, she found herself trapped in this nightmare. Fatima's eyes held a deep sadness, but also a fierce determination. She whispered to Amara in French-accented English, "We must remember who we are. They can take our freedom, but they cannot take our souls unless we let them." Those words would become Amara's mantra in the dark days ahead, a lifeline to her identity when everything else was being systematically stripped away. She clung to memories of her family, her father's gentle wisdom, her mother's strong hands, Chitty's infectious laughter before the accident. She replayed lectures from her favorite professors, recited poetry she had memorized, did complex mathematical equations in her head. Anything to keep her mind sharp and her spirit from being completely crushed. The traffickers sorted them by various criteria that Amara didn't fully understand but could guess at with growing dread. Some women were separated immediately, presumably destined for the sex trade. Others, including Amara and Fatima, were kept in a different group. They were younger, educated, spoke English, valuable for different purposes in the vast underground economy of human exploitation that on the 5th day, everything changed again. A group of well-dressed men entered the warehouse, their expensive suits and polished shoes incongruous against the squalor of the surroundings. They were buyers, Amara realized with horror. This was an auction, and they were the merchandise. The reality of her situation crashed over her with devastating finality. She was going to be sold, bought, owned. The word slavery had always seemed like something from history books, a horror humanity had supposedly overcome. Now she understood that it had never disappeared. It had simply evolved, hidden in plain sight within the global economy's dark corners. The auction was conducted with disturbing efficiency. The buyers examined their potential purchases, asked questions about health, education, skills, and background. Some haggled over prices. Others made quick decisions and moved on. Amara felt herself dissociating, her mind trying to escape what her body could not. She focused on a crack in the concrete floor, tracing its path with her eyes, imagining it was a river leading somewhere safe. Then he arrived. Zhang Weichun was not like the other buyers. He moved with quiet authority, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Tall for a Chinese man, he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Amara's father earned in a year. His face was handsome but stern, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was accompanied by 2 bodyguards and an assistant who took notes on a tablet. When Zhang Wei stopped in front of Amara, she felt the weight of his gaze. Unlike the other buyers who had looked at her like an object, there was something different in his eyes, not kindness exactly, but a kind of clinical assessment that suggested he was evaluating more than just physical attributes. He asked the trafficker questions about her in Mandarin, his voice deep and measured. The trafficker responded eagerly, sensing a serious buyer. "She speaks English? She is educated?" Zhang Wei asked in English, his accent minimal. Yes, very educated. University student. Computer science. Very smart. Very valuable." The trafficker replied in broken English, his enthusiasm making Amara's stomach turn. Zhang Wei addressed her directly. "What is your name?" Amara's throat was dry, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara Okonkwo." "Where are you from, Amara Okonkwo?" "Nigeria. Lagos." She forced herself to meet his eyes, some defiant part of her refusing to be completely broken. "I was tricked. Lied to. I'm not supposed to be here. I should be in school. My brother needs surgery. I was trying to help my family." Zhang Wei's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He turned back to the trafficker and negotiated in rapid Mandarin. Amara didn't understand the words, but she understood the body language. Zhang Wei was a man used to getting what he wanted, and he wanted to buy her. The thought made her want to vomit, but she had nothing left in her stomach. The transaction took less than 10 minutes. Money was transferred electronically. Papers were signed. Amara Okonkwo, a human being with dreams and dignity and a family who loved her, was sold for the equivalent of 50,000 US dollars. She didn't know if that was a high price or a low one in this horrific marketplace, and she didn't want to know. Zhang Wei's assistant, a woman named Miss Lin who wore designer glasses and spoke perfect English, processed the paperwork with the efficiency of someone buying office equipment. She asked Amara routine questions about her health, allergies, and medical history, as if this were a normal job interview. The surreal nature of the situation made Amara wonder if she was going insane. When the transaction was complete, Zhang Wei spoke to his bodyguards in Mandarin. They unbound Amara. Her wrists were raw and bleeding from the ropes, and gave her water and a protein bar. It was the first kindness she had experienced in days, and it confused her. Wasn't he her enslaver now? Why would he care about her comfort? "You will come with me," Zhang Wei said matter-of-factly. "You will not be harmed if you do not try to escape. Do you understand?" Amara nodded, too exhausted and traumatized to do anything else. As she was led out of the warehouse, she looked back at Fatima, whose eyes were filled with tears. They exchanged a look that contained volumes of unspoken words. Goodbye. Good luck. Remember who you are. Survive. Then Fatima was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the warehouse, and Amara was stepping into blinding sunlight and an uncertain future. The vehicle Zhang Wei traveled in was a Mercedes-Benz S-Class, the interior more luxurious than any space Amara had ever occupied. The leather seats were soft, the air conditioning was perfect, and there was even bottled water in a small refrigerator. The contrast between the horror of the warehouse and the opulence of this car was so stark that Amara's mind struggled to process it. She sat rigidly, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Zhang Wei sat across from her, his attention on his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be business emails. Miss Lin sat beside Amara, occasionally glancing at her with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been curiosity. The bodyguard sat in the front, silent and vigilant. No one spoke for the first 30 minutes of the drive. Finally, Zhang Wei put down his phone and looked at Amara directly. "I suppose you have questions," he said. Amara's voice came out stronger than she expected. "What are you going to do with me?" "That depends on you," he replied cryptically. "I did not buy you for the reasons you might think. I am not a monster, Miss Okonkwo, though I suspect you find that hard to believe given the circumstances." "Then what?" Amara demanded, surprising herself with her boldness. What did she have to lose? She was already in hell. Why buy a human being? Why participate in this evil? Zhang Wei's jaw tightened slightly. The world is more complicated than simple categories of good and evil. But I will explain everything when we arrive at my estate. For now, I suggest you rest. You are safe. You have my word. The word of a man who buys people. Amara shot back that to her surprise. Zhang Wei's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. You have spirit. That is good. You will need it for what comes next. He returned his attention to his phone, effectively ending the conversation. Amara stared out the window as the cityscape passed by, gleaming skyscrapers, busy streets, modern infrastructure that spoke of China's economic might. People went about their daily lives, completely unaware that a trafficked woman sat in a luxury car just feet away from them. The ordinariness of it all was somehow more disturbing than the warehouse. Evil didn't always look like evil. Sometimes it wore expensive suits and drove Mercedes-Benzes. The drive took nearly 2 hours, leaving the city behind for increasingly rural landscapes. They passed through small towns and agricultural areas before finally turning onto a private road that led to an expansive estate. High walls topped with sophisticated security systems surrounded the property. The gate was manned by security personnel who waved them through with respectful nods. The mansion that came into view was breathtaking. A modern architectural marvel, that somehow blended contemporary design with traditional Chinese elements. It sprawled across perfectly manicured grounds, with gardens, water features, and what appeared to be a separate building that might have been a guest house or staff quarters. This was wealth on a scale Amara had only seen in movies. The car stopped in front of the main entrance, where a small staff of servants waited. They were dressed in matching uniforms, and they bowed slightly as Zhang Wei emerged from the vehicle. Miss Lin gestured for Amara to follow, and she did, her legs shaky from days of immobility and terror. Take her to the blue guest room. Zhang Wei instructed Miss Lin in English. Provide her with clothes, toiletries, food, everything she needs. Have Dr. Liu examine her to ensure she is not injured or ill. She is not to be locked in or restrained unless she attempts to leave the property. Make that clear to the staff. Yes, sir. Miss Lin replied crisply. Zhang Wei turned to Amara. We will speak tomorrow, after you have rested and recovered some strength. Until then, consider yourself a guest in my home, albeit one who cannot leave. Is that clear? Amara nodded mutely. She didn't understand what was happening, but exhaustion was catching up with her. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the past week was evaporating, leaving her hollow and trembling. She was led through the mansion, barely registering the opulent interiors, marble floors, priceless artwork, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. The blue guest room was larger than her family's entire apartment in Lagos. It had a king-sized bed with linens that looked impossibly soft, a sitting area with a sofa and chairs, a desk with a computer, and large windows overlooking the gardens. The attached bathroom was equally luxurious, with a soaking tub, a rainfall shower, and toiletries that were probably worth more than a month of her mother's wages. Clothes have been prepared for you, Miss Lin said, opening a closet to reveal an array of garments in various sizes. We estimated your measurements, but if anything doesn't fit, let us know and we'll arrange alternatives. Dr. Liu will be here within the hour to examine you. In the meantime, please feel free to shower and make yourself comfortable. Dinner will be brought to your room at 7 o'clock. I can't leave, Amara asked, her voice small. Miss Lin's expression softened slightly. The estate is monitored by sophisticated security systems. Any attempt to leave would be detected immediately and stopped. But within the house and grounds, you are free to move as you please. Mr. Zhang does not believe in cruelty for its own sake. He asks only that you cooperate and not cause trouble. After Miss Lin left, Amara stood in the center of the room, trembling. Then the dam broke. She sank to the floor and wept. For herself, for Fatima and the other women still trapped in that warehouse, for her family who must be frantic with worry, for the life she had lost, for the uncertain future that stretched before her. She cried until there were no tears left, until her body ached from the force of her grief. Finally, empty and numb, she dragged herself to the bathroom. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow and red-rimmed, her hair matted. She looked like a ghost of herself. Mechanically, she stripped off the filthy clothes she had worn for days and stepped into the shower. The hot water was a revelation. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away not just the physical dirt, but the feeling of violation, of having been touched and evaluated and sold. She washed her hair 3 times, watching the dirty water swirl down the drain. She stood under the spray until it started to run cold, and even then, she was reluctant to leave its cleansing embrace. Dr. Liu arrived as promised, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. She conducted a thorough examination, checking for injuries, malnutrition, and signs of abuse. She drew blood for testing, administered vaccines, and prescribed antibiotics and vitamins. Through it all, she spoke softly in accented English, explaining everything she was doing and why. When she finished, she told Amara that physically, she would recover. The psychological wounds, she acknowledged with sad eyes, would take much longer. Dinner arrived on a cart: soup, rice, vegetables, fish, fresh fruit, and tea. Amara discovered she was ravenous despite her emotional turmoil. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling strength return to her body even as her mind remained in turmoil. After eating, she sat by the window, watching the sun set over the gardens, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscenely beautiful given the horror she had just survived. That night, lying in the impossibly soft bed, Amara couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. Her mind raced with questions. Who was Zhang Weichun? Why had he bought her? What did he want from her? Was this some elaborate game, a temporary respite before some worse fate? Or was there something else happening, something she didn't yet understand? Morning came with soft light filtering through sheer curtains. For a moment, Amara forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back, and with it, a wave of despair so profound she could barely breathe. She was in China, thousands of miles from home. She had been trafficked, sold, bought like property. Her family didn't know where she was. For all they knew, she might be dead. She forced herself out of bed, her body stiff and sore. Breakfast arrived promptly at 8 o'clock. Congee, steamed buns, fruit, and jasmine tea. A young maid delivered it, barely making eye contact, her expression neutral. Amara wondered what the staff thought of her presence. Did they know she had been bought on the black market? Did they care? After breakfast, Miss Lin appeared. Mr. Zhang will see you in his study at 10 o'clock. I will escort you there. Please dress appropriately. She gestured to the closet. The blue dress would be suitable. Amara wanted to refuse, to assert some small measure of control, but she knew it would be pointless. She was in Zhang Wei's world now, subject to his rules and his schedule. She dressed in the blue dress, a simple, elegant design that fit her surprisingly well, and allowed Miss Lin to lead her through the mansion's corridors. Zhang Wei's study was a masculine space of dark wood, leather, and books. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface neat except for a laptop and a few carefully arranged papers. Zhang Wei stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the landscape. He turned when they entered, dismissing Miss Lin with a nod. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He seated himself behind the desk, steepling his fingers and studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Amara sat, her back straight, determined not to show weakness even though she felt like she might shatter into pieces. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice steady. "What do you want from me?" Zhang Wei leaned back in his chair. "Direct. I appreciate that." "Very well, Miss Okonkwo. I will be equally direct. I purchased you from the black market not for the typical reasons men buy women. I have no interest in you as a sexual or romantic object. I bought you because I need someone with a very specific set of characteristics, and you possess them." "What characteristics?" Amara asked warily. "You are young but educated. You speak excellent English and have a degree in computer science, or would have, had you completed your studies. You are intelligent, resourceful, and, I suspect, desperate enough to cooperate if given the right motivation. You are also African, which is relevant for reasons I will explain. Most importantly, you are, in the eyes of the law, invisible. You do not officially exist in China. There is no record of your entry into this country. No one is looking for you here." The words hit Amara like physical blows. He was right. She was a ghost, erased, disappeared. "So I'm useful to you because I don't exist? Because I'm vulnerable?" "Yes," Zhang Wei said without apology. "But before you condemn me entirely, know this. The same qualities that make you useful to me also mean I can offer you something valuable, a second chance." "A second chance?" Amara laughed bitterly. "You bought me. You own me. That's not a second chance. That's slavery." Zhang Wei's expression hardened. "Do not lecture me about slavery, Miss Okonkwo. I am well aware of what I have done and what I am. But consider your alternatives. I could have left you in that warehouse. Someone else would have bought you, likely for the sex trade or organ harvesting. Instead, you are here, in a comfortable room, fed, clothed, and safe. You are alive and unharmed. That is worth something, is it not?" Amara wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right, and she hated him for it. "What do you want from me?" she asked again. Zhang Wei opened a drawer and pulled out a file, sliding it across the desk to her. I am the CEO of Chun Enterprises, a multinational corporation with interests in technology, manufacturing, and real estate across Asia and Africa. My company is expanding operations in several African countries, including Nigeria. To do this effectively, I need people who understand both African and Chinese business cultures, who can navigate both worlds, who can be trusted with sensitive information. He paused, letting her absorb this. You, Miss Okonkwo, are going to become one of those people. I am offering you a position as my personal assistant for African operations. You will learn my business inside and out. You will accompany me on trips, attend meetings, handle communications. You will become indispensable to me and my operations in Africa. Amara stared at him in disbelief. You traffic me to be your assistant. I prefer to think of it as unconventional recruitment, Zhang Wei said dryly. But yes, essentially. The difference is that unlike a normal employee, you cannot quit. You cannot go to the authorities. You cannot leave. You will work for me, and in exchange, I will provide for all your needs. More than that, I will pay you. Your salary will be deposited into an account I have established. You will not have access to it while you work for me, but when your service is complete, the money will be yours. When my service is complete, Amara repeated. You mean when you've decided you're done with me? No, I mean after 5 years. Work for me diligently and without betrayal for 5 years, and I will release you. Your accumulated salary will be substantial, enough to transform your life and your family's lives. I will provide you with new identity documents that will allow you to legally exist again. I will ensure you can safely return to Nigeria or settle wherever you choose. I am offering you not just survival, Miss Okonkwo, but eventual freedom and financial security. Amara's mind reeled. This was insane. All of it. Yet there was a cold logic to what he was proposing. She had no options. She couldn't escape. He had made that clear. She couldn't go to the police. She was in China illegally, purchased from traffickers. Even if authorities didn't arrest her as an illegal immigrant, they might send her back to the same traffickers or worse. And her family needed money desperately. Why should I believe you'll actually free me after 5 years? She asked. Why wouldn't you just keep me indefinitely? A fair question. The answer is that I am a businessman, not a sadist. I value efficiency and return on investment. An employee, even an enslaved one, who knows they have an endpoint works harder and more loyally than one who sees no hope of freedom. I am investing significantly in you. I want that investment to pay dividends. You incentivized to cooperate and excel is worth more to me than you broken and resentful. He pulled out another document. This is a contract. It spells out the terms I have described, your duties, your compensation, the conditions of your eventual release. I am aware of the irony of a contract between an enslaver and an enslaved person, but I am a man who values structure and clarity. Read it. Think about it. You have 24 hours to decide. Decide, Amara said incredulously. What choice do I have? More than you think, Zhang Wei replied. I am not interested in a servant who needs constant coercion and surveillance. If you refuse this arrangement, I will sell you back. Perhaps to someone less principled than I. Perhaps you will end up in the sex trade after all, or as a domestic servant in conditions far worse than this. Or you can accept my offer, work hard, survive, and eventually walk away with your freedom and enough money to build a new life. The choice, such as it is yours. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Miss Lin will answer any questions you have about the specifics. Take your time. Think carefully. But know this, Miss Okonkwo. I am offering you the best deal you are likely to get in your current circumstances. I advise you to take it. After he left, Amara sat alone in the study, the contract in her trembling hands. She wanted to tear it to pieces, to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all. But what would that accomplish? She was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. Zhang Wei had laid out her options with brutal clarity. Work for him under controlled conditions with eventual freedom, or be sold back into a situation that would likely be far worse. She thought of her family. Her brother Chitty, who needed surgery. Her parents, who must be frantic with worry. If she worked for Zhang Wei, if she earned the salary he promised, she could eventually help them. 5 years. 5 years of her life in exchange for their security and her eventual freedom. Was that not a trade people made all the time in less dramatic circumstances? People worked jobs they hated for far less reward, but this was different. This was servitude, slavery. No matter how Zhang Wei dressed it up with contracts and salaries and promises of freedom, the fundamental truth remained. She had been bought. She was owned. She would be forced to work without the ability to leave. That was slavery, no matter how comfortable the cage. The alternative was unthinkable. At least here, in this bizarre arrangement, she retained some autonomy, some dignity, some hope. That had to count for something. It had to. Amara spent the rest of the day reading the contract obsessively, analyzing every clause, every term. It was surprisingly detailed and, in a twisted way, fair. Her duties were clearly spelled out. She would serve as Zhang Wei's assistant for African operations, handling communications, translations, cultural consultations, and administrative tasks. She would accompany him on business trips as needed. She would live on his estate and be available as required. In exchange, she would receive a salary equivalent to $100,000 per year to be held in escrow and released to her at the end of 5 years. She would be provided with all necessities: housing, food, clothing, medical care. She would receive training in business, languages, and any skills deemed necessary for her role. She would not be physically or sexually abused. She would not be sold or transferred to another party. After 5 years of satisfactory service, she would be released with new identity documents and all accumulated salary. There were clauses about confidentiality, non-disclosure, and the consequences of betrayal or attempted escape. Those consequences were not spelled out in detail, but the implications were clear. If she violated the agreement, all bets were off. She would lose everything and likely face far worse. That evening, Miss Lin brought dinner and sat with her while she ate. "You were thinking about Mr. Zhang's offer," she said. "It wasn't a question. Do I have a choice?" Amara replied. Miss Lin considered this. "We always have choices, Miss Okonkwo. Sometimes they are merely choices between bad options and worse ones. But they are choices nonetheless. Has he done this before? Bought people like this?" Miss Lin's expression became guarded. "Mr. Zhang's business methods are his own. I will say this, he is a man of his word. If he promises you freedom after 5 years, you will receive it. He values his reputation, even in dealings that occur outside conventional society. Why does he need me specifically? Why not just hire someone normally? Because normal employees can quit, can betray confidences, can be turned by competitors or authorities. You, Miss Okonkwo, have no such options. You are bound to him by circumstance, if not by choice. That makes you, paradoxically, more trustworthy than someone who could walk away." It was the same cold logic Zhang Wei had expressed. Amara found it both horrifying and, in a perverse way, almost understandable. She didn't like it, but she understood it. The next morning, when Miss Lin came to collect her answer, Amara had made her decision. She had spent the night weighing her options, praying to a God she wasn't sure listened anymore, and ultimately accepting the reality of her situation. She could fight and be destroyed, or she could adapt and survive. She chose survival. "I accept," she told Miss Lin, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I will work for Mr. Zhang under the terms he specified." Miss Lin nodded, showing no surprise. "A wise decision. Mr. Zhang will be pleased. Your training begins immediately." The first month was a blur of information and adaptation. Amara discovered that Zhang Wei had not exaggerated when he said she would need training. Every day was packed with lessons, lectures, and practical exercises designed to transform her from a traumatized trafficking victim into a competent business assistant. She studied Mandarin intensively, spending 4 hours every morning with a tutor named Mr. Wang, who was patient but demanding. She learned business terminology, cultural protocols, and the subtle art of Chinese business negotiation. She studied Zhang Wei's company inside and out, its structure, its operations, its competitors, its strategies in various African markets. She took classes in international business law, economics, and finance. She learned to use sophisticated software for project management, data analysis, and communication. She studied the political and economic landscapes of Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, and other African countries where Chin Enterprises operated. She learned about mining operations, manufacturing processes, technology infrastructure, and real estate development. The education was expensive and comprehensive, far exceeding what she would have received at university. Zhang Wei was investing heavily in her, she realized, which made his insistence on the 5-year term more understandable. He was creating an asset, molding her into exactly what he needed. She also learned about Zhang Wei himself, though much of this knowledge came through observation rather than explicit instruction. He was 36 years old, unmarried, and entirely consumed by his business. He had inherited Chun Enterprises from his father at age 25 and had grown it exponentially through aggressive expansion and strategic acquisitions. He was respected in Chinese business circles, but also feared. His reputation for ruthlessness was well-earned that he maintained a carefully controlled public image: philanthropist, innovator, business leader. Few people knew about the darker aspects of his operations, the gray and black market dealings that supplemented his legitimate businesses. Those who did know kept quiet, either through fear, complicity, or compensation. Despite everything, Amara found herself grudgingly respecting his intelligence and efficiency. He was brilliant, there was no denying it. His mind worked several steps ahead, anticipating problems and opportunities before they materialized. Watching him work was like observing a master strategist playing chess while everyone else played checkers. Their interactions during this period were purely professional. He checked on her progress regularly, reviewed her work, provided feedback that was always precise and sometimes harsh. He expected excellence and accepted nothing less. When she stumbled over a Mandarin phrase or misunderstood a business concept, he corrected her without cruelty but also without sympathy. She was not a victim to be coddled. She was an employee to be developed. 3 months into her training, Zhang Wei took her on her first business trip, a week-long visit to Chin Enterprises operations in Nairobi, Kenya. The trip was both thrilling and terrifying. She was leaving the estate for the first time since arriving, but she was also acutely aware that escape was impossible. Zhang Wei made sure she understood that his reach extended far beyond China. He had business connections, security personnel, and informants across Africa. Any attempt to flee would be detected and stopped. Her family would suffer the consequences of her betrayal. A threat, implicit but clear, hung over her constantly. Her family was both her motivation and her cage. Zhang Wei had discovered the most effective leash, not one made of chains or locks, but one made of love and responsibility. She worked hard not just because she feared punishment, but because cooperating meant eventually being able to help her family. In Nairobi, Amara saw Zhang Wei in action in a new context. He met with Kenyan government officials, business partners, and potential clients. She watched him navigate complex negotiations, switching effortlessly between charm and intimidation, always getting what he wanted. He included her in meetings, having her provide cultural insights and handle communications with English-speaking partners. It was strange being treated as a professional colleague by the man who had bought her, but she adapted. She had to. On the 4th day, Zhang Wei surprised her by giving her an afternoon off. "Go explore the city," he told her. "See your motherland, even if it is not your specific country. But remember, my security personnel will be watching. Do not test me, Miss Okonkwo." She wandered Nairobi's streets, her heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. She was in Africa, breathing African air, hearing African languages, seeing African faces. She was so close to home, yet impossibly far. She could see Nigerians in the business district, could overhear Yoruba, and she wandered Nairobi's streets, her heart aching with a complex mix of emotions. She was in Africa, breathing African air, hearing African languages, seeing African faces. She was so close to home, yet impossibly far. She could see Nigerians in the business district, could overhear Yoruba and Igbo conversations that made her throat tighten with homesickness. Every face reminded her of someone. Her mother's determined expression in a market woman's haggling, her father's gentle eyes in an elderly man reading a newspaper, Chitty's mischievous grin in children playing soccer in a vacant lot. She bought a prepaid phone from a street vendor with money Miss Lin had given her for expenses. Her hands shook as she dialed her mother's number, a number she had memorized since childhood. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then her mother's voice, weary and heartbroken. "Hello? Who is this?" "Mama," Amara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's me. It's Amara." The sound that came through the phone was primal, joy and grief and relief colliding in a single cry. "Amara, my daughter. Oh God, where are you? Are you alive? Are you hurt? We thought. I'm alive, Mama. I'm okay. I can't explain everything, but I'm safe. I'm working. How is Chitty? Did he get the surgery?" Her mother's voice broke. "Baby, Chitty, he passed 2 months ago. The hospital couldn't wait any longer. We tried everything, borrowed from everyone, but it wasn't enough. He died waiting, baby. He died calling for you." The world tilted. Amara's knees gave out and she collapsed against a wall, the phone pressed to her ear, her brother's name a silent scream in her throat. Chitty, her baby brother. The reason she had taken that job offer, the reason she had trusted Patricia, the reason she had walked into the trap that had destroyed her life. And he was gone. She had sacrificed everything, and he was gone anyway. "Amara? Amara, are you there?" Her mother's desperate voice pulled her back from the abyss. "I'm here," she managed, though her voice was strangled. "I'm so sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry. Where are you, daughter? Come home. Please come home. Your father, he hasn't been the same. He blames himself for your disappearance. Please, just tell us where you are." Amara looked up and saw Zhang Wei's security personnel watching her from across the street. They hadn't approached, but their presence was a clear reminder of the invisible chains that bound her. She couldn't go home. Not now. Not for 5 years. Maybe never, if she couldn't fulfill her contract with Zhang Wei. "I can't, Mama. Not yet. But I will send money. I promise. I have a job, a good job. I will send money every month. Enough to pay off all the debts, enough to give you and Papa a better life. I just need time. I don't want money. I want my daughter," her mother cried. "Please, Amara. Whatever trouble you're in, we can fix it together. Just come home." "I can't," Amara repeated, her heart shattering. "But I love you. Tell Papa I love him. Tell him I'm sorry. I have to go now, Mama. I'll call again when I can." She ended the call before her mother could protest further, before her resolve crumbled completely. She threw the phone into a nearby trash bin. Zhang Wei would know about the call within hours anyway, and keeping the phone would only invite more temptation and more pain. She walked through Nairobi in a daze, her grief over Chitty mixing with the surreal horror of her situation. She had lost her brother, lost her family, lost her life, all because she had tried to save the people she loved. The cosmic unfairness of it threatened to break her completely, but even in her darkest moment, something in Amara refused to surrender. Chitty was gone, but her parents were still alive. They were struggling, drowning in debt, blaming themselves for everything that had happened. She couldn't bring Chitty back, but she could give her parents the security they deserved. She could honor her brother's memory by surviving, by succeeding, by transforming this nightmare into something that would at least provide for the family she had left. When she returned to the hotel that evening, Zhang Wei was waiting in the lobby. His expression was unreadable, but she knew he was aware of the phone call. He said nothing, simply gestured for her to follow him to his suite. Once they were alone, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed her one. "Drink," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. Amara drank, the alcohol burning down her throat, grounding her in physical sensation when emotional pain threatened to overwhelm her. "I know about your brother," Zhang Wei said quietly. "I had my people investigate your family situation before I purchased you. I knew he was ill. I did not know he would die before you could help him. For what it is worth, I am sorry." "Your sorrow means nothing," Amara said bitterly. "Your sorrow didn't save him. Your money could have, but you spent it buying me instead." "That is true," Zhang Wei acknowledged without defensiveness. "I could have given you the money freely to save your brother. I chose not to. I chose to buy you instead because I needed you for my purposes. That is the nature of my character, Miss Okonkwo. I am not a good man. I have never claimed to be. but I am a man who keeps his agreements. He set down his glass and looked at her directly. You called your mother. You could have told her where you are, could have asked her to contact authorities, could have attempted to orchestrate a rescue. You did not. What? Because you would have stopped it, Amara said. Because you would have punished my family. Because I have nothing left to give except my cooperation. Partially correct, Zhang Wei said. But I think there is more. I think you are beginning to understand that survival sometimes requires choices that compromise our principles. You are learning to be pragmatic. That is a valuable skill in business and in life. Is that what you call it? Pragmatism. Amara laughed harshly. I call it slavery. Call it whatever you like. The reality remains unchanged. He refilled both glasses. Your brother's death changes nothing about our agreement. You will continue your training. You will work for me. In 5 years, you will be free and wealthy enough to transform your parents' lives. You can honor your brother's memory by succeeding. Or you can break, and I will sell you, and your suffering will have accomplished nothing. Choose. It was the same brutal choice he had offered before, but now it carried additional weight. Chitty's death could either be meaningless tragedy or the catalyst that drove her to succeed. She could let it destroy her, or she could channel her grief into determination. She thought of what Fatima had said in the warehouse. They can take our freedom, but they cannot take our souls unless we let them. I choose to succeed, Amara said, her voice hardening with resolve. I will work for you, and I will be the best assistant you have ever had. Not because I forgive you for what you've done, and not because I accept that what you've done is right, but because my brother died waiting for help that never came, and I will not let my parents suffer the same fate. I will earn every dollar you promised me, and when my 5 years are complete, I will walk away with my head high and my family secure. That is my choice. Zhang Wei studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. That is the attitude that will ensure your survival and eventual success. Channel your anger into excellence, Miss Okonkwo. Make yourself indispensable. In doing so, you will achieve a kind of power even within the constraints of your situation. Over the following months and years, Amara did exactly that. She threw herself into her work with fierce intensity, driven by grief, anger, and determination. She became fluent in Mandarin and conversational in several other Chinese dialects. She mastered the intricacies of international business, becoming expert in African markets and Chinese business practices. She accompanied Zhang Wei on dozens of trips across Africa and Asia, handling increasingly complex responsibilities. She discovered she had a natural talent for negotiation and relationship building. Her African heritage and Chinese language skills made her a bridge between worlds, able to navigate cultural differences that often stymied others. Business partners who were initially suspicious of Zhang Wei became more comfortable when Amara was involved, seeing her as a more approachable intermediary. Zhang Wei recognized her value and gave her increasing autonomy. She began handling entire projects independently, managing communications between Chinese headquarters and African operations. She negotiated contracts, resolved disputes, and identified new opportunities for expansion. She became, despite the horrific circumstances of her employment, genuinely skilled at her work, but she never forgot what she was. No matter how comfortable her life became, no matter how much Zhang Wei came to rely on her expertise, she remained fundamentally unfree. She lived in a gilded cage, pampered and well-treated, but caged nonetheless. The estate was luxurious, but was still a prison. Zhang Wei was respectful, but was still her enslaver. Her salary accumulated, but remained inaccessible. She sent money to her parents through channels Zhang Wei arranged, always anonymous, never with any information that could trace back to her location. Her parents' lives improved dramatically, debts paid, a new home purchased, her father able to retire comfortably. But she couldn't speak to them, couldn't see them, couldn't explain where the money came from. She was a ghost providing for her family from beyond the grave of her old life. As the years passed, her relationship with Zhang Wei evolved in complex ways. They were not friends. The power imbalance made true friendship impossible. But they developed a professional rapport built on mutual respect, however grudging. He valued her intelligence and competence. She recognized his brilliance even as she despised his methods. They worked together with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, each understanding the other's, thinking almost intuitively. There were moments of unexpected humanity. Once, when she fell ill with pneumonia during a trip to Lagos, Zhang Wei personally ensured she received the best medical care, staying up through the night to monitor her condition. Another time, when she broke down crying on the anniversary of Chitty's death, he simply sat with her in silence, offering no platitudes but also not leaving her alone in her grief. These moments confused her. It would have been easier if he were purely monstrous. But he wasn't. He was complicated, capable of terrible actions and unexpected kindnesses, driven by ruthless ambition but also bound by his own peculiar code of honor. She hated that she sometimes saw him as human rather than simply as her captor. In the fourth year, something shifted. Zhang Wei's father, the founder of Chun Enterprises, died suddenly of a heart attack. Zhang Wei inherited not just more wealth, but also more responsibility and more scrutiny. His business practices came under investigation by both Chinese authorities and international organizations concerned about his African operations. The pressure transformed him. He became more cautious, more calculated, more aware of his public image. He began restructuring parts of his business, moving away from gray market operations toward more legitimate enterprises. He established charitable foundations, funded schools and hospitals in African communities, and publicly committed to ethical business practices. Amara watched this transformation with cynicism at first. It seemed like a performance, a calculated move to deflect investigation. But as months passed, she began to wonder if something deeper was changing. Zhang Wei seemed genuinely troubled by questions about his legacy, about what he would leave behind when he died as his father had. One night, working late in his study on a proposal for a technology training center in Lagos, Zhang Wei poured them both whiskey, a ritual that had become habit during late-night work sessions, and asked her a question that surprised her. Do you think a person can change fundamentally, Miss Okonkwo? Or are we bound by the choices we have made, defined forever by our worst actions? Amara considered the question carefully. I think people can change their behavior and make different choices going forward. But I don't think they can undo the harm they've caused or erase their past actions. Redemption, if it exists, isn't about becoming innocent again. It's about acknowledging guilt and trying to prevent future harm. A harsh assessment, Zhang Wei said. Says the man who bought me on the black market. Amara replied with dark humor that had become typical of their late-night exchanges. Zhang Wei smiled slightly, an expression that had become more common as the years passed. Point taken. But if I were to try to change, to become better than what I have been, where would I start? You could start by freeing me, Amara said immediately. And not just me, anyone else trapped in similar arrangements. You could use your resources to fight trafficking rather than profit from it. Zhang Wei was quiet for a long moment. You have 9 months remaining on your contract. What if I released you early? What if I freed you now? Amara's heart raced. Freedom. Early freedom. Everything she had dreamed of for nearly 5 years. But she forced herself to think carefully. Why would you do that? What's changed? Perhaps I am tired of being the villain in your story, Zhang Wei said quietly. Perhaps my father's death has made me contemplate mortality and legacy. Perhaps I have come to value your opinion and hate seeing the judgment in your eyes every day. Or perhaps I simply recognize that I can no longer justify the unjustifiable, even to myself. He pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. This is a release from your contract. Sign it, and you are free to go. I will provide you with new identity documents as promised, plus your full 5-year salary despite leaving early. I will also provide an additional payment, compensation for what I have taken from you. It won't make what I did right, but it is something. Amara stared at the document, her hands trembling. This was it, the freedom she had dreamed of. But suspicion warred with hope. Why now? What do you really want from me? Nothing, Zhang Wei said, and for the first time in their 4 years together, she heard something like regret in his voice. Or perhaps one thing, your forgiveness, though I know I have no right to ask for it and do not truly expect to receive it. You're right, Amara said coldly. You don't deserve my forgiveness. You bought a human being. You enslaved me. You stole years of my life. The fact that you treated me relatively well doesn't change the fundamental evil of what you did. I know, Zhang Wei acknowledged. I am not asking you to absolve me. I am simply offering you freedom because it is right, and because I should have done it 4 years ago when I first saw you in that warehouse. I should have freed all of you, should have shut down that operation, should have done many things differently. I cannot undo the past, but I can change the future. Amara picked up the document and read it carefully, looking for traps, hidden clauses, anything that would turn this offer of freedom into another cage. But it seemed straightforward. Sign, and she was free. Her salary would be transferred immediately. New documents would be prepared within a week. She could go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. I need time to think, she said finally. Zhang Wei nodded. Take whatever time you need. The offer stands. But Miss Okonkwo, Amara, know that whether you accept or not, whether you sign that document tomorrow or 9 months from now, you have taught me something important. You have shown me that dignity cannot be bought or sold, only voluntarily surrendered or fiercely maintained. You never surrendered yours, despite everything. That has been instructive. That night, Amara lay awake, wrestling with the most important decision of her captivity. Freedom was offered, but could she trust it? And if she took it, what then? Where would she go? Who would she be? The woman who had entered that warehouse 4 years ago no longer existed. She had been transformed by trauma, grief, and survival. She had skills now, resources, connections. She could build a new life. But what kind of life? She thought of her parents, finally secure but still grieving for their lost children. Chitty dead, Amara disappeared. She thought of Fatima and the other women from the warehouse, whose fates she had never learned. She thought of all the people still trapped in modern slavery's nightmare, invisible victims of the global economy's darkest corners. An idea began to form, audacious and terrifying and right. She could take her freedom and her money and disappear into a comfortable life of anonymity. Or she could use what she had learned, the connections she had made, the resources she had access to do something meaningful. She could fight back against the system that had victimized her. She could become a voice for the voiceless. The next morning, she went to Zhang Wei's study with the document. I'll sign it, she said. But I have conditions. Zhang Wei raised an eyebrow. You are in no position to negotiate conditions for your freedom. Actually, I am, Amara said calmly. Because you don't just want to free me out of guilt. You want to change, to become better, to build a different legacy. I can help you do that, but not as your slave or even as your employee. As your partner. Explain, Zhang Wei said, leaning forward with interest. You have resources, connections, and power. I have experience, motivation, and moral clarity that you've lost somewhere along the way. Together, we could create something that actually matters. We could establish an organization dedicated to fighting human trafficking, not just writing checks to charities, but actively disrupting trafficking networks, rescuing victims, prosecuting traffickers. We could use your business connections to identify and shut down black market operations. We could fund rehabilitation programs for survivors. We could create real change. She paused, gauging his reaction. You say you want redemption. You can't achieve that by simply releasing one slave and feeling good about yourself. But you could achieve something meaningful by dedicating your resources to preventing others from experiencing what you put me through. Use your darkness to fight darkness. That would be a legacy worth leaving. Zhang Wei was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the calculated business smile she had seen him deploy countless times, but something more genuine. You are proposing that I atone for my sins by turning my resources against people like my former self. Yes, Amara said. And I'm proposing that I help you do it. Not because I forgive you. I don't, and I probably never will. But because trafficking continues, and we have the power to fight it. That's bigger than my personal grievance against you. You would work with me voluntarily? After everything. Not with you as your slave or employee, Amara clarified. With you as an equal partner. I would be co-founder and director of this organization. We would make decisions jointly. My voice would carry equal weight to yours. That's non-negotiable. Zhang Wei considered this, then extended his hand. equal partners in fighting the evil I once participated in. It is poetic in a way. Very well, Miss Okonkwo. I accept your terms. Let us build something worthy from the ashes of our worst actions. Amara shook his hand, feeling the symbolic weight of the gesture. This was not forgiveness. This was not friendship. But it was a chance to transform victimhood into agency, to channel suffering into purpose. She was free now, truly free, but she was choosing to remain connected to Zhang Wei not through slavery, but through shared mission. Over the following months, they established the Freedom Initiative, an organization dedicated to combating human trafficking across Africa and Asia. Zhang Wei provided substantial funding and used his business connections to identify trafficking networks. Amara led the operational side, working with law enforcement, NGOs, and survivor advocates to develop comprehensive anti-trafficking strategies. They rescued their first group of victims 6 months after founding the organization, 12 women from a trafficking ring in Guangzhou. Amara insisted on being present for the rescue operation. When the women were brought out of their captivity, confused and terrified, she spoke to them in English and French, telling them they were safe now, that they would be cared for, that their nightmare was ending. One of those women was Fatima. After 4 years, Amara saw her again, thinner, scarred, but alive. When Fatima recognized her, they embraced and wept. Later, Fatima would join the Freedom Initiative staff, becoming one of their most effective advocates for survivor rehabilitation. Word of their work spread. Other victims came forward with information. Law enforcement agencies began collaborating with them. Trafficking networks that had operated with impunity found themselves exposed and dismantled. The work was dangerous, complex, and emotionally exhausting, but it was also deeply meaningful. Amara used her accumulated salary to establish a foundation for trafficking survivors, providing education, healthcare, and job training. She funded the surgery her brother had needed, but for dozens of other children whose families faced similar crises. Every child saved was a tribute to Chitty's memory. She reconciled with her parents, finally able to explain where she had been and what had happened to her. The conversation was painful, filled with tears and recriminations, and eventually, understanding. They couldn't undo the past, but they could move forward together. Her parents became involved with the Freedom Initiative, her mother using her sewing skills to teach job training classes for survivors, her father offering literacy education. Zhang Wei's transformation was not complete or perfect. He still ran his business with ruthless efficiency, still operated in morally gray areas that made Amara uncomfortable. But he had redirected his resources and influence towards something positive. He became a vocal advocate for anti-trafficking legislation, used his political connections to pressure governments into action, and publicly admitted his past involvement in human trafficking, a confession that shocked the business world and led to investigations, sanctions, and ultimately, significant reforms in how black market operations were prosecuted. As years passed, Amara's relationship with Zhang Wei evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Not forgiveness exactly, not friendship in the conventional sense, but a complex partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect. They had wounded each other and been wounded by the same systems. Together, they were working to heal those wounds in others. 5 years Eleanor Amara stood on the stage at the International Conference on Human Trafficking in Geneva, Switzerland, addressing an audience of government officials, NGO leaders, and activists from around the world. At 33 years old, she had become one of the most prominent voices in the anti-trafficking movement, known for her powerful testimony and practical solutions. Modern slavery is not a relic of the past, she told the audience. It is a thriving industry that exploits millions of people every year. I know this not from academic study, but from lived experience. 10 years ago, I was trafficked from Nigeria to China and sold on the black market. I was one of the lucky ones. I survived, and I eventually found freedom. But millions more remained trapped, invisible, voiceless. She paused, letting her words sink in. We cannot end trafficking through awareness campaigns alone. We need systemic change, stronger laws, better enforcement, economic opportunities that give people alternatives to desperate choices. We need to disrupt the supply chains of slavery just as vigorously as we disrupt any other criminal enterprise. And most importantly, we need to listen to survivors, to center their voices and experiences in our solutions. After her speech, she was surrounded by people wanting to speak with her, to share their stories, to ask for advice. Among them was a young woman from Ethiopia who had recently escaped a trafficking situation. Amara spent time with her, listening, offering support, connecting her with resources. This was the work that mattered, not just giving speeches, but helping individuals reclaim their lives. That evening, she met Zhang Wei for dinner at a restaurant overlooking Lake Geneva. This had become their tradition at international conferences, a chance to debrief, strategize, and maintain the partnership that had defined both their lives for the past decade. "Your speech was powerful," Zhang Wei said. "You move people in ways I never could." "That's because I speak from authentic experience," Amara replied. "You speak from authentic guilt. Both have their place." Zhang Wei smiled at her directness. Over the years, their ability to be brutally honest with each other had become one of their partnership's strengths. "The Ethiopian government has agreed to implement our proposed victim protection protocols. Your testimony helped convince them." "That's good news," Amara said. "But implementation is always the challenge. We'll need to monitor it carefully, provide training and support." They discussed strategy for the next hour, their conversation flowing with the ease of long collaboration. They disagreed frequently, argued passionately, but always found ways to move forward together. It was an unlikely partnership forged in horror but sustained by shared purpose. As dinner ended, Zhang Wei asked a question that had become less frequent over the years but still arose occasionally. "Do you forgive me, Amara, for what I did to you?" Amara considered the question carefully, as she always did. Forgiveness implies that what happened is in the past, resolved, healed. But it isn't. I carry it with me every day. I see it in the faces of every survivor we help. I feel it in the gaps in my own life, the years I lost, the brother I couldn't save, the innocence I can never reclaim. She met his eyes directly. "But I no longer hate you. Hate is exhausting, and I have better uses for my energy. I respect the work you've done to make amends, even though it can never truly balance the scales. I value our partnership and what we've accomplished together. If that's not forgiveness, it's at least peace. And for now, that's enough." Zhang Wei nodded slowly. "That is more than I deserve. Thank you for your honesty." "Always," Amara said. "That's our deal, remember? Brutal honesty, equal partnership, shared mission. It's the only way this works." They parted ways that night, each returning to their separate lives that remained intertwined by purpose. Zhang Wei returned to Shanghai to oversee his business empire, now substantially restructured toward ethical practices. Amara returned to Lagos, where the Freedom Initiative's African headquarters was based, where her parents lived, where she felt most connected to her roots and her mission. The next morning, Amara visited a rehabilitation center the Freedom Initiative had established for trafficking survivors. She spent time with residents, listening to their stories, offering encouragement, helping them navigate the complex process of rebuilding lives after trauma. One young woman, recently rescued from a domestic servitude situation, asked Amara how she had found the strength to survive and eventually thrive. Amara thought about the question, about the long journey from that warehouse to this moment. "I survived by remembering who I was even when everyone around me tried to make me forget. I survived by turning my pain into purpose. I survived by refusing to let the worst thing that happened to me become the only thing that defined me." She paused, emotion rising in her throat. "But I also survived with help. From people who saw me as human when I was being treated as property, from partners who gave me opportunities to use my skills, from family who never stopped loving me even when I couldn't be with them. Survival isn't just individual willpower. It's community, connection, and people who refuse to give up on each other." That evening, Amara called her parents. They spoke for an hour about ordinary things: her mother's sewing business, her father's community organizing, the grandchildren her cousins were producing, the upcoming family wedding. These ordinary conversations, impossible for so many years, had become precious. They were reminders that she had not just survived, but had come home, transformed, but still herself. Before ending the call, her mother said something she always said now. "I'm proud of you, Amara." Chitty would be proud too. You took something terrible and made it meaningful. That takes a kind of courage most people never need to find. After the call, Amara sat on her balcony overlooking Lagos, watching the city's lights twinkle in the darkness. She thought about the journey, from university student to trafficking victim to slave to survivor to activist. She thought about Zhang Wei, the man who had bought her and then freed her, who remained complicated and problematic but also committed to atonement. She thought about the thousands of people still trapped in modern slavery, the ones she had helped rescue, and the countless others she hadn't reached yet. The wound of her trafficking would never fully heal. The years she lost could never be reclaimed. Her brother could never be brought back. But she had transformed her victimhood into agency, her suffering into service, her captivity into a catalyst for freedom. Not just her own, but for thousands of others. She had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting or even forgiving. It was about integrating trauma into a larger story, one where pain had meaning and survival had purpose. She had learned that people were capable of terrible evil and surprising redemption, often simultaneously. She had learned that freedom was not just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, dignity, and self-determination. Most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger than she ever imagined. The woman who had been broken in that warehouse had not stayed broken. She had pieced herself back together, not into her original form, but into something new, scarred but resilient, wounded but wise, marked by suffering but not defined by it. Today's night deepened over Lagos. Amara felt something she hadn't felt in years: genuine peace. Not because her journey was over or her wounds were healed, but because she had found meaning in the meaningless, hope in the hopeless, and light in the darkest corners of human experience. She had been bought and sold, enslaved and freed, broken and rebuilt. And through it all, she had remained herself, Amara Okonkwo, survivor, advocate, fighter, and finally free. The price of her freedom had been terrible, but the freedom itself, once achieved, was priceless. And the work she had built from her suffering, the lives saved, the networks dismantled, the hope restored, that was a legacy worth all the pain it had cost. She closed her eyes and felt the warm African breeze on her face. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles in the ongoing war against trafficking and exploitation. But tonight, she was home, she was free, and she was at peace with the complicated, painful, ultimately redemptive story of her life. The darkness that had tried to consume her had instead forged her into light for others. That transformation, more than anything else, was her victory, not over Zhang Wei, not over the traffickers, but over the despair that had threatened to destroy her spirit in that warehouse so many years ago. She had survived. She had thrived. She had turned the worst thing that ever happened to her into the foundation for helping others. And in doing so, she had discovered that resilience wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about the courage to piece yourself back together when you shattered, and the wisdom to use those broken pieces to create something beautiful and meaningful and true. As the city hummed with life around her, Amara Okonkwo, survivor, advocate, and beacon of hope, smiled. Her story wasn't the story she would have chosen, but it was hers, and she had made it matter. And that, in the end, was enough. The end author's note. This story, while fictional, addresses the very real crisis of human trafficking, which affects millions of people worldwide. If you or someone you know needs help, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 1-888-373-7888, or text HELP to 233733. Please like, and subscribe.